is not very different from your story, yet we can identify different periods. If we're talking about the 20th century, you know, until the Ottoman period, early 1920s or 1918, the motifs were similar. And we can talk about, we can probably relate it to the culture of the craftsman, since most of the motifs were nearly identical, or at least they were following a very specific rule that is very much related to the techniques of making the handrail, and not only the handrail, of course, also the wrought iron work in general. But then later, I think that in the first phase, in the 1920s and 1930s, I do not have the proof, that there was a sort of, let's say, a strong marriage between the craftsman and the architects, or the designer in general, where the designer was choosing probably the motif. I mean, if we're talking about catalogs, the choice was made not by the craftsman, but by the architect. And the craftsman could be assisting the architect in that period. So probably advising what could be done, what can be easily done, or what is really more expensive or less expensive, etc. And this is the period of the French Mandate. This is where the influence was way more, was much stronger. But later in the independence time of Lebanon after 1943, but I'm talking mainly about luxury residential buildings from the 1950s in the city of Beirut. In most of the original drawings, we see the balustrade, we see the handrail, we see the wrought iron work, and maybe on original drawings they are simplified, yet they are there. So I assume that by the 1950s, architects had the position or had the power to decide what they want, and they could not really give it only to the craftsman. But again, the craftsmen I have encountered also, not the ones who worked by then, but probably their children and their grandchildren, they assisted architects, and they do have some documents from architects where architects were expressing what they wanted, choosing a certain drawing, and probably making other drawings or changing it. One of the stories I can tell is that I have found one picture of a catalog, or one scanned image, I didn't find the original one, where the architect was saying this one, celui-ci, this drawing, so this is the one that he wanted. But then later when I went to survey the building, I discovered that it was that one plus. So it was that drawing with a small modification that was added by the architect. So I think that it shifted gradually from the craftsman progressively toward the architect. Another actor in this story is the client himself. You know, I don't know about Turkey, but one of the inputs of the client is also to put his initials in some parts. And we see that on some of the doors and some of the gates, especially outside the city of Beirut in the suburbs, but also it can appear also in Beirut. And it can appear also, I mean, this is probably the client and the architect themselves when they try to offer a new drawing. This can be not related to the catalog, or it can start from the catalog, but then later it can be adapted to local specificities or local cultural specificities, such as the cedar tree, such as the Phoenician legend, or etc., etc. So I think there were many actors, so craftsman, architect, and designer, and then later a combination of two, and then the architect and designer, and then later at the later stage we find the client. What is important also to mention is that this long history had different moments of, let's say it was, how can I call it, shaken by some chapters or some elements. One historical moment was the mid-1950s with the arrival of aluminum. And this is when The design in general became way more simplified. I don't know when it appeared in Turkey and in Ankara, but in Lebanon, and in Beirut specifically, since it was a very rich city back then, it appeared. And then progressively, we can see that there was this tendency of simplifying ornaments afterward.